Hello, lovely learners. Welcome back to ALifeLearned. I thought I would start this one off with a silly little story, although I recognize from the title it's obviously a more serious topic. But yesterday, I was driving by a house of students just partying. I was going to call it a frat, but I'm like, no, it was a tiny little house, but it was full of boys, you know, between 19 and 23 or something, drinking and like playing games out in their front lawn. And I guess one of them happened to have owned this Sebring Chrysler that was directly parked in front of mine, and was identical except for the damages to my car. We won't get into that. But, and he had a few ridges on his hood that mine didn't have. But otherwise, they looked identical. And so because the end of the street was a cul-de-sac and I was right near the end, I decided it was just easier, also because the road was really narrow, to just drive down the road around the cul-de-sac and then come back in order to turn around. And that meant driving by this group of boys playing games in front of their house. And I guess as I drove by, they freaked out a little because the car looked just like one of theirs. And so they were like, did someone just steal my car? And in their alcohol-induced decisions, topic of the video, they decided to try and jump out in front of my car because they thought I was stealing it, right? And so they're like trying to stop me. And just to be clear, if you think someone's stealing your car, they're probably not going to stop if you jump in front of them. They're trying to steal your car. They're already breaking a law. Right? I mean, I guess some people get desperate and they'll do something like break into a car, but then if it comes down to manslaughter, they'll stop there. I hear that. But on the grand scheme of things, if someone's stealing your car, the next logical thing is not to jump in front of the car to stop them. That just means getting run over and your car stolen. Logic, right? Anyway, obviously I wasn't stealing this person's car. We just had identical cars, but I found it quite comical. And I like dead stopped in front of their house and turned my music down and was like, it's identical, right? Except for the front fender and the back bumper. Because on the one side they initially saw, the passenger side, it looks exactly the same and it looks fine. On the driver's side, mind you, there's a front panel. The car's red, but the front panel is silver because the last people sucked. And it's not even the right panel for the car. It's like, I have a Chrysler Sebring, and it's a panel for a Chrysler 200 or 300, so it's a whole thing. And then recently, I put some, like, we'll call it Frankenstein stitches on the back of my bumper in order to make sure that the bumper doesn't fall off, because that's one of the reasons I'm fundraising for a new car. But anyway, the point of this is, very clearly from the driver's side, you could see that it wasn't this person's vehicle. But he hadn't seen that at first, and I was just coming back from the cul-de-sac kind of fast. I would say I was still at the speed limit, but still, kind of fast. And then here's these two boys just running out in front of me being like, whoa, what? Why are you stealing our car? Alcohol-induced decisions do not lead generally to good things. I think we all know this. And so again, hence the title. Recently, the Canada Mental Health Association, CMHA, has called for the province to develop an alcohol strategy. Basically, a way to respond to the fact that we have so many people consuming so much alcohol on a regular basis. Apparently, according to their statistics, it costs our province, in our so-called free healthcare, over $7 billion, or around $7 billion a year, to deal with alcohol-related injuries. And at least in the last year, or in the year that they pulled these statistics from, over 6,000 people died from alcohol-related injuries. So obviously unnecessary deaths, right? And a lot of unnecessary injuries for that matter. Basically everything that those people were doing while drunk, they wouldn't have been doing. They would have been making better choices if they weren't alcohol-induced. And so, reasonably, that's a lot of money. And thus, I think it's really responsible that CMHA is calling for this alcohol strategy plan. And they've got a letter that they are writing to MPPs and MPs, pushing for them to make this an official federal, if not province-wide, rather provincial. If not provincial, then federal. Why not make it federal, right? But at this point, it's CMHA within Ontario. More the point is, they want to make it official. They want to have it declared across the province and have it integrated into our healthcare plans so that we can frankly start saving money and hopefully saving lives. And it really only makes sense when you think about it, because when it comes to, socially acceptable addictions, putting coffee aside, because that is literally the worldwide most common addiction that everyone shares. Not me, though. I don't do coffee. But anyway, I don't do caffeine. But I do drink alcohol. I will totally acknowledge it is one of my coping mechanisms sometimes for my trauma. And it's the way I celebrate a lot of the time. And so it's really, really common. Everyone drinks, right? Even if you're underage half the time, which is unfortunate. Um, and everyone considers it acceptable. Lots of us actually would fall under the CAGE scale for having either dependency or actual addiction to alcohol, but we don't realize it because we're not familiar with what the CAGE scale is. I'll leave some links below, both for if you want to sign the letter to encourage your MP or MPP rather to push this strategy forward for basically our healthcare and our hospitals to have some kind of response plan for people who come in alcohol induced. But I'm also going to leave some links below for the other things I'm mentioning if you're interested in learning more. But anyway, I just thought that was a really funny story. It just happened to me yesterday. I giggled and laughed all the way home about the fact that those boys actually thought that they could somehow stop me by running in front of my car, and just how incredibly foolish that was. And it really made me think it was a great opener, funny and ridiculous, for this topic, because it is a perfect example of people making dumb, terrible, illogical decisions because they've been drinking, and maybe even drinking a little too much. I'm not anti-alcohol. I definitely understand that you can have a few and be fine. You can still be competent to drive. You can still be competent to make decisions. I think these boys had more than a few. Like, I had walked by them over an hour before and they were drinking, and then I came back and they were drinking, and I'm sure they'd been drinking before I got there, and I'm sure they kept drinking after I left. So yeah, as someone who has had, we'll say, unfortunate situations of tripping and other things and injuring myself, I get, sometimes you just have accidents when you're drinking, and it's not a big deal. It's something that would have happened when you were sober too. But I also get that a lot of dumb shit happens when you're alcohol induced. And the thing that's particularly frustrating about this is how much money in free healthcare, we're calling it free healthcare, but there's a lot of things that aren't covered. We know this in Ontario. But anyways, our hospitals are covered in most areas. So when you walk in there with an injury, they generally treat you. So they're spending $7 billion treating people for all these random injuries they get because they chose to drink. But because I was born into a neglectful family and traumatic situations, and then put through systemic trauma over and over and over, I don't have a right to therapy covered by OHIP. I don't have a right to the health care that I need for things that I was a victim to, that I had no decision in, that I had nothing to do with at all. And if I got this treatment covered by OHIP, covered by our free healthcare, so to speak, I would be so much more productive in society. I would be so much more competent and capable because I wouldn't have been struggling to find ways to cover therapy through the years, which means I would have been further along right now. Just so many things to think of, you know what I mean? In terms of the health problems we develop from mental illness that come out of trauma, and how we just don't get healthcare for that. And then all of the shit that results out of people choosing to drink, and how they do get healthcare for that. And then we won't even talk about the fact that alcohol is often a coping mechanism for untreated trauma. So they'll treat our coping mechanisms and the injuries from that, but they won't help us deal with those coping mechanisms and develop healthy coping mechanisms and heal mentally. Just gives you a little something to think about in terms of our free healthcare, right? But anyways, if you understand the intensity that alcohol causes, you will be on the page here with me in terms of wanting to sign this letter. If you don't, I encourage you to read a little bit more from the links that I post in the comments, because this is a problem that's been ongoing since alcohol was basically invented. It's been, there was a prohibition for a reason, and I'm not someone who is about prohibition. I don't think banning or restricting any substance is going to help anything. I don't believe in abstinence. I don't believe in banning. I believe in decriminalization of all substances, actually, because open access and open healthcare allows people to make the decisions to get well instead of just coping. So yeah, these are my thoughts on the topic. I'm going to be signing the letter. I encourage you to sign the letter. And if you have any funny stories about people making dumb decisions in alcohol-induced brains, or yourself, if you want to share a silly story about yourself making a mistake or hurting yourself, or a hospital story, feel free to share in the comments as always. Ultimately, one of the reasons this is such a problem is because our healthcare here in Ontario is painfully fractured and suffering as a result of disgusting underfunding. But we won't get into that. That's not the topic of the subject. It is just more a topic of the video. It's more just how could we make our currently struggling system function a lot better by having a strategy that approaches people over drinking, people overusing alcohol, and people just hurting themselves and making bad decisions because they've consumed too much. In my opinion, one step would be provide therapy so that people aren't turning to alcohol so much. But that's just me. I know, totally. Like, I'm sure CMHA agrees with that, but we all know that they're not about to approve that. An alcohol strategy is a starting point anyways. So please, as always, do share your thoughts below and join me again next week or sometime soon where I try again to share a little something I've learned or experienced in life.